Welcome everybody to the Center for Teaching Excellence webinar for this afternoon. My name is Casey Carroll. I am an instructional designer and I will be kind of hosting and moderating for today. We'll be doing exploring the economics, consumerism, and enterprise of academic dishonesty. I will go ahead and let our facilitators introduce themselves here in just a second. And just so y'all know, if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and put your information in the chat so that we can keep track of attendance. This is for the Fostering Proactive Learning Environments Certificate of Completion, so please make sure to stay through till the end. If you have any trouble with any of your tech or anything, please let us know in the chat, and my colleague April and I will help you out. Otherwise, I will turn it over to our facilitators and let y'all get started while I switch to the slides. All right, take it away.
Thank you. We'll do introductions first, and my name is Elisa Liggett, and I work with Academic Integrity, Student Conduct, our care team, and Title IX. And what we hope to do today is help instructors, help Lucy define, but we want to introduce you to some kind of environmental factors that are probably affecting your classroom that you may not be aware of, and then how to combat those and how to incentivize students to kind of not fall prey to some of these things. And then I will turn it over to Jesse, who will turn it over to Casey.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jesse Townsend. I serve as a coordinator for Student Conduct and Academic Integrity in the Office of Student Conduct and Academic Integrity. And as Elisa just mentioned, we are very excited to provide this information to you all on important topics within academic integrity. And I'll turn it over to Casey.
I won't take up too much time. This is Casey Whitener. I'm an instructor over in the Moore School of Business, and I met Jesse and Elisa at Oktoberfest, where I was talking about this project that I use in my class to try to ensure that students can't cheat. And they said, "Oh, we love this. You should come tell everybody." So here I am. So thank you very much for inviting me and including me, and looking forward to spending some more time talking about this with y'all.
Thank you, and that's pretty much exactly how it happened. I think we tackled her so she couldn't leave. So thank you for being part of this, Dr. Whitener. We're very excited. And so looking at the title of this, even economics, consumerism, and enterprise are probably words that you have never associated with academic dishonesty. And certainly when many of you as participants were in school, those concepts would never have been on the same slide as the title. So this is kind of a new cottage industry of subverting academic integrity. And so there are a lot of kind of social things that have fueled it, but we want to look at how to identify what may be happening around you that you may not be aware of. And as I said, then look at how do we reimagine how we design our classroom so that it's less enticing for students to kind of fall into some of these areas. So looking at our learning outcomes for today. So these look a little bit heavy, but we're going to learn the economic and consumerism implications that surround academic dishonesty that are kind of brand new inventions, and identify the tools to help students develop intellectual autonomy. So, you know, we teach students lots of wonderful disciplines, but we rarely teach them how to learn, and that fervor for knowledge, especially in their chosen area, is something that they should nurture and something that we can help them nurture. So we're going to talk about that as well. And then figure out how you can develop transparency in community so that students are bought into both what you are offering to them in the classroom, into their learning and their goals, and not just temporary mastery of, you know, certain content and then moving on. So big items for today, looking at the science of cheating. So there are studies that have been done since 1938 with college students and high school students about the science of this. And so this is a lot of work from a psychologist named Benjamin Lovett. And one of the first things that he wants to differentiate is that it's different between cheating and plagiarism. And what I think part of what he's getting at is that cheating is a little bit more involved, and it shows a little bit more disassociation from what's happening in the classroom than just cutting and pasting through plagiarism, even though there certainly can be some overlap in how students cheat. So one of the things that he looks at, and one we need to figure out as the foundation, is what are the mechanisms with which, you know, students kind of get into a place where cheating feels like an acceptable behavior, or where they are more motivated to do so than they normally would be. Because students, I think, don't normally just want to cheat in the class. They are here because they have chosen to be here. So some of those motivations, top motivations that he found, are competition. These are all things that I think if we did this in a chat box, people would probably get. Inadequate time to study for an exam, overly difficult assignments where they feel like they either aren't confident completing it, or it isn't really worth the time because they have other demands, and a lack of interest in the course and material. And so one of the things that we're looking at is this book. We love the drama of the handcuffs. In the Office of Academic Integrity, we do not handcuff people, by the way. But it is called Pedagogy, Not Policing. And so it's a positive approach to academic integrity. And again, how we kind of use instructional design to subvert all of these incentivizations that some corporations who can make money off of students are using kind of in competition with us. So he also found, what are some of the correlations of demographics that are associated with higher rates of cheating? And those include being a male, having a full-time job, so having some time constraints, belonging to a fraternity or sorority, and finding that more upperclassmen than freshmen cheat, but older students within a classification are more likely to cheat, are less likely than younger. So if you have sophomores, you know, you take all of our sophomores in the Darla Moore School of Business, and some are 28 and, you know, some are 19, even though they're sophomores, and so that grouping is more likely to cheat. The 30-year-olds are less likely to cheat within that same group. But we all know we should not use those demographic variables to suspect students of cheating, but he was just looking at a very wide swath of what are demographics that we should consider, and then knowing those considerations, how do we speak more articulately to the students in that class to disincentivize? So what we want to talk about is, what are some of the opportunities that you have as instructors to counter that temptation based on what we know are student self-reported justifications, which are these motivations for cheating that are at the top, the competition. Another layer of that are the psychological traits. And these are somewhat stronger correlates of cheating, but students are motivated by grades. So they have to get a certain grade. It isn't about genuinely learning the material. Students who feel alienated or dissatisfied with school, and we don't know. We suspect that during COVID, when we saw exponential rates of cheating in the Office of Academic Integrity, this probably was a contributing factor. This research already existed, and we saw what may have been the implication of that during COVID. And then students with higher levels of anxiety about academic performance, again, are focused on the end goal instead of the process. So what are some opportunities that we have to counter this temptation? What this author says in Pedagogy, Not Policing is that instructors should take pains to present their assignments as fair and meaningful tasks that are organized into a workload that's reasonable. So letting students know on day one how much reading is going to be assigned and how much time students should expect to devote to reading, so that they know going in, they don't feel like they just got, you know, pummeled one day when, you know, there were 200 pages of assignments. So being sure that they understand how much time, some people are slow, some people are quick readers. So figuring out an expectation that's reasonable and communicating that openly. Another tip that was interesting that he suggests is that if you're grading on a curve, know that that can exacerbate some of the sense of competition. And so if students feel like they have to get ahead because they work full time and other students don't, there may be some weird ways that we don't intend to incentivize cheating, but they're like, well, it's on a curve, so I have to compete with all these other people who don't have the same constraints that I do. And that justification, though we know unjustified, can kind of build when they're feeling particularly stressed, or as we're seeing in the psychological traits, I'm a little bit more anxious. So how do we apply these findings? When you're discussing academic integrity, address those higher risk groups. So If we know that our or our higher juniors and seniors cheat more, then if you have a group of seniors saying many of you are getting close to graduation, this is a stressful time, please set aside this amount of time, or know that this final project is the highly weighted one in the classroom, so be sure that you're planning properly. Since we know students in time-consuming commitments, which incorporates our fraternity and sorority members and our students with full-time job, they may be less willing to devote as much time to studying. So make test preparation activities part of students' grades. And you're going to hear this a lot of times in this, because it's a strategy to combat so many different motivations for cheating. So if students hand in their review questions and they get some sort of participation grade, or they get some sort of academic credit just for doing review questions, you're kind of building in those structures already. Brief review questions during class is great, and addressing their underlying concern. So saying, I know you guys are busy, we're going to take the last 5 minutes of class so that you can map out your prep time, because the final exam is in a week. So let's just take a few minutes so that if you need to meet with your group or do whatever, things that kind of help channel their time so that they're planning it wisely.
Transition into contract cheating. Elisa just sort of defined what cheating is generally in terms of the motivations behind why students do it. And contract cheating is sort of a specific branch off of cheating. So Clark and Lancaster, back in 2006, they defined it as essentially outsourcing work in a sense, and having someone submit work for you by paying them for that service and contracting them. And so over the years, contract cheating has become increasingly more popular and complex as technology continues to advance. And so what initially may have started out as just your normal essay mill, regular website that will offer to write a paper for you, now it's turned into a multitude of different things. So that could be presentations, taking an exam for someone if they're able to do that. Even in more extreme cases across the world, dissertations and literature reviews being written. And so they've expanded their services to really encompass all students and their needs and what they are struggling with. And contract cheating specifically, Lancaster sort of explains in one of his research articles. So there's the commercial contract cheating, which some of you may be familiar with, and that's just your regular websites out there that offer their services as a legitimate business. But then there are the non-commercial cheating, and that can honestly just be through a family member or a friend who a student pays to write a paper for them. So when outlining it, that does make it a little bit more difficult to detect contract cheating, because as you can imagine, if I have my mother write a paper for me as a professor, how can you detect that? How can you trace that back to the fact that a student didn't actually write it on their own? So contract cheating is a little bit difficult in today's age because of the technology that's available and all the services that students have available to them. And then now sort of the economics of academic dishonesty and thinking about why a student may decide to engage in contract cheating. We know the motivations behind it, as Elisa mentioned, but now specifically, the three components that we've sort of outlined here is time, money, and rewards. And time being the aspect that all students don't have the same 24 hours because of responsibilities they may have, or different things that they're involved in, or simply just the number of credit hours that they're taking. So sometimes the concept of time is going to be a major part of why a student may outsource their work and decide to pay for these services, because they simply don't have the time to do their assignment. But then also the money aspect that comes into it. For a student who has a job, and let's say their part-time job pays them $10 an hour to work an 8-hour shift, that's $80 that they could potentially earn in a day. So now they have to sort of make that decision, and they've reached a point of cognitive dissonance of, do I take the 8-hour shift to make this money, or do I study for 8 hours? So that's an interesting decision that they have to make in terms of, is the time and money aspect worth the risk of getting caught for cheating? And for some students, that may be a decision that they decide to engage in because, as I'll discuss a little bit more about these services, right now, depending on certain variables, I could purchase a paper for 40 bucks right now. So if I go to work and earn 80 bucks and I pay $40 to have this paper written for me, I've then been able to make money, but also still get my assignment done, as opposed to if I just didn't go to work at all, I wouldn't make any money, and how would I be able to afford to outsource work and things of that nature? And then the last component, rewards. Oftentimes when I meet with students, they are very under pressure in terms of retaining scholarships and being able to attend the University of South Carolina. So put yourself in the shoes of a student who could potentially be at risk of losing their scholarship if it requires them to be above a certain grade point average. The cost of losing a scholarship that let's say is worth $5,000 a year versus, paying out a few bucks to have someone complete an assignment, that also is a motivational aspect and something that is very enticing to our students because they rationalize that as being able to make a financial decision that will save them in the long run. So not to say that these decisions are the right thing to do or that they're justified, but it does provide us a little bit more understanding of the psychology behind why a student may decide to engage in contract cheating and outsource their work. And so as the quote sort of indicates at the bottom, an understanding of market forces serves as a motivator for students to engage in academic dishonesty. And these are definitely important components to consider as you design your courses and how much time it will take, as Elisa mentioned. If there are readings, letting them know how much time they will need to devote to that. Because a lot of these things are a domino effect, and time equals money, and money equals rewards in a sense.
And I appreciate, Jesse, that you mentioned we are not justifying this behavior. Certainly, it would be an easy presentation to say this is the importance of academic integrity, and this is why we're so worried about the moral decomposition and blah, blah, blah. That we're preaching to the choir. What this is about is, like we talked about, an industry that we didn't even know existed, more than 10 or 15 years ago, and that most people still don't. And so what we have to do as instructors is make sure that students aren't just walking into your classroom to be able to repeat what you have taught them, but to really go for deeper understanding and to kind of fuel that fire in their desire to learn. And so when we're talking about these strategies, it's more to get students to the place or pull most of their mindsets closer to where we are. So the enterprise of academic misconduct, starting with product versus process. And I think that many of us who have been in a college environment for more than a few decades have seen even admissions materials, all of those things go from a very scholarly product and people choosing for a scholarship to publications that are glossy and show amenities and show all of the things that you benefit outside of the classroom from. And so it's not surprising that colleges that are underfunded by state legislatures who have to make it up in tuition dollars are having to sell something in order to at least make enough revenue to stay open. So that's a broad overstatement, I know, but we can't deny that there is a product aspect to this. And so helping students understand that, what this has been, well, or helping ourselves understand, this has been a long time coming also, even from child's research, that the No Child Left Behind age contributed to an education system that prioritizes scores over outcomes. So No Child Left Behind was signed by President Bush in 2002, and it was to bring all students to a proficiency level on state tests by 2013 to 14. So now we're telling our teachers, we're telling our students, we're telling our parents, we've got to achieve this outcome this product instead of making sure that our students are learning along the way. Now, that's not all bad. Of course, it's supported by civil rights organizations because we're closing some achievement gaps between poor and minority students and students who had English as a second language and their peers, all very positive and necessary steps. And of course, in the business world, certainly our business leaders wanted to make sure that we were more internationally competitive. But I think we can all see those social and national functions that contributed to this. And the get what you pay for, pause. Can we just say college admission cheating scandals? So we see this everywhere. You know, if you go to a prestigious school, you expect that then you're going to get a prestigious job. I don't even think we realize those correlatives that we have created. But that's a natural assumption that we have all, that many of us have bought into.
And then also assignments are transactional. And so Ritter 2005 kind of indicates that the idea of students handing in their assignment and in return being assessed a grade, sometimes it can be viewed as transactional. And so then students begin to look at everything as being an economic decision rather than an intellectual thing. And so explaining the purpose behind your assignments can often address these issues so that students don't perceive that they're completing these assignments just for it to be work that's tedious or monotonous, but that there's actually an intellectual gain and purpose behind completing the assignment. And then lastly, the enterprise is supported by the companies who are exploiting our students. And I'll transition a little bit more into that about how they use students' weaknesses against them to make it more enticing, more attractive for them to use their services. And so right here, I sort of have an example advertisement, and this was just random, me sort of just looking up and finding the first available website, but majority of them, there's hundreds of them out there, they will have something along these lines. And so as you can see here, they're guaranteeing that they will provide privacy. So essentially the idea that your information is safe with us, this will remain confidential, and no one outside of our transaction will sort of know about this. And then also reassuring them that they have professional writers. They have, this specific company had over 500, and they have a rating system with stars, so you're able to see different reviews of writers and who you want to select to complete your assignment for you. And then of course they're also reassuring you that this is plagiarism free. Your assignment will not be detected or anything, because they, at the end of the day, they are producing original work. It's just not the student's original work, it's through someone else. And so these are trained writers who were likely strong writers in college who have sort of picked up this occupation maybe as a side gig or maybe as a full-time gig to write papers for other individuals. And then on-time delivery, this specific website that I was on, all you had to do was indicate how much time you needed it in. I think the lowest amount of time was maybe 3 to 4 hours that they could have the paper completed for you. Of course, the shorter the time window, the more it costs, but it is feasible for them to have a paper written in a matter of 3 hours. And so, yeah, just things like that. And so if you're in the thinking of the perspective of a student who is stressed out, overwhelmed, doesn't have the time to complete an assignment, this looks very enticing, and this is something that will probably get their attention and seem as a very good decision to make because it saves them time. All they have to do is pay a few bucks for it. And for some of our affluent students who may have the ability to afford it, it definitely can serve as a good option. And so, yeah, contract cheating websites, they have mastered the approach of using that persuasive language and taking a slick approach to being able to encourage our students to engage in it. And oftentimes our students just reading these messages, they don't understand how they've been intentionally targeted. But for professionals such as us who are able to read these things, we can see how they've psychologically sort of geared toward the students' needs and welfares and being able to get them to engage in the behavior. In one of the articles that I read, they had an example from an Australian site um, where they had a specific language on their homepage for students, and it goes, "We wish all the students around the world to have a happy and peaceful life, and we don't want any of them to be a victim of stress because of being unable to fulfill the demands of their studies." So intentionally using, those buzzwords of having a happy and peaceful life and stress and things like that will always sort of resonate with our students, because as we know, a lot of them are experiencing issues with mental health and being stressed out. And so with a company being able to reassure that they can help to relieve some of that stress, that is definitely going to entice our students. So the question remains, if students with mastery goals cheat less because of their goals, can we change students' goals and motivational orientations?
Yeah, take a moment in the chat box, literally a moment, because we're so excited for you guys to hear from Casey. What does this bring up for you? What are your responses? So we know that No Child Left Behind, a lot of these corporations paying for a product, not a process, have all taught students that mastery of goals, is the primary goal. So how do we unpack that? Is this possible? Just put a few thoughts in the chat box. The second part of this presentation is to address this exact question. Good. Yes. Actually, Megan, well done. This shows it up in a section of this book. And Ormond is the author of this kind of study that looks at how do we kind of backtrack this. Excellent. And a couple of her more, I think, basic things, yes, excellent, are to point out the real world utility of the knowledge. And we see it, so we don't always know that we need to identify it for students and connect those dots, but doing that is one strategy that we can readily adopt, emphasizing the importance of deep understanding versus rote memorization. So some of you kind of captured that as well, that the deep understanding, allows us to build. The rote memorization does not, especially our students who are looking to go to graduate school, making sure they know in, these biology classes and these business classes and others, that getting this foundation of deep meaning and exploring curiosity is critical, and encouraging students to view their instructors as resources for learning, and not just lecturers or graders, but as a research person. So even in our undergraduate research office, it's wonderful that they have a list of people who are willing to explore with students ideas for research and for thinking about new ways to, examine an issue. So this is our big question. This might be fun for you to also ask in a faculty meeting.
And so I'll briefly kind of go over this, but I think the answer to the question that we've sort of posed is getting into developing intellectual autonomy and how we can help our students achieve that, because taking ownership of their learning is a major part of helping to dissuade or deter that behavior of them engaging in contract cheating. And so development of metacognition, and so that's the idea of thinking of your own thinking. And it's sort of abstract, but different activities or skills that students can build around how their thinking process sort of occurs and how that relates to the coursework and ultimately the learning outcomes and goals that they have for the class. Reflective management and learning, and then ultimately the final step, that success drives intrinsic motivation. So instead of them focusing on extrinsic things like rewards, the grades, and all of that, that they're allowing sort of the idea of them understanding the content and grasping the information and allowing that to drive their success.
So what's our pedagogical approach toward this intellectual autonomy? How do we make this come to life? And then Casey's going to really bring it to life but it's implementing inquiry-based learning that will provide deeper responses to questions. So really posing a question that can't just be quickly answered, but has to be pondered, that has to require some contemplation, and asking students to write in first person so that they're verbalizing their opinions of what they think. So they're kind of internalizing it a little bit more, reflecting a little bit more, adding kind of an ego dynamic to it so that they know it's a reflection to you, who they want to impress, of what their thought process is. Incorporating peer review to require students to take responsibility for their own learning. So every review that they do, they're learning from the student they're reviewing also. And I have this inkling that sometimes students assume, oh, our instructors, if they have to read 50 pages, aren't reading them that closely because they have so much to do. If they know one other peer is writing it, I think it may even increase the standard that they hold themselves to, because they, again, have a little bit of a natural ego incentive in that. Scaffolding major assignments to ensure the accountability through low stakes method. So again, if you have a rough draft due 3 weeks before it's due, you give that feedback, 2 weeks before it's due. You have them submit any final questions if they want to submit an extra draft, 1 week before it's due. Just making sure that they have an opportunity to force themselves to plan ahead. And then making test preparation, as we already said, that this is recommended in a whole different set of analysis, making those test preparation activities part of the student's grades. So in what I really like about the second one, and asking students to write in first person, is it's students are authoring their essays in the first person about their synthesis of things. So, people say, oh, I just write what the professor wants to hear, which is so offensive. I'm sorry that people say that to our professors, because I know there's something you just want to hear. But they have to develop and defend their own values. And so if you are giving the rubric for a peer review in the third bullet, then that peer can also start to see how you see papers. So their job is then to point out what is unclear, what is undersupported, and then they're learning from their peers' paper how to then apply it back to their own. And Dr. Whitener, thank you so much for bringing your absolutely exquisite version of how to implement this to our presentation today.
I love that previous slide, because that's the one that you guys presented at Oktoberfest, and I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm doing all these things. I got as excited as you did at Oktoberfest, because I kind of like jumped out of my chair when I saw that. I instituted what I call the personal achievement plan probably 5 or 6 semesters ago, and essentially what I was finding was that everybody would turn in their work all at the same time, and I was having to grade everything at the same time, and it just made me miserable. So instead I thought, well, let me give them a chance to set their own deadlines. And so it started with that. Like, I just want to give them a chance to set their own deadlines. They can turn their work in whenever they want to. And so we sit out at the beginning of the semester and they create for themselves their version of the syllabus. They look at what their options are in terms of, these are the different pieces of work that you can do. These are the different assignments that are available to you. And then they make choices about which assignment they're going to pursue, about which dates they're going to turn them in. And I build in some incentives, like if they turned it in before spring break, they got a little 5% boost for turning it in. There's also that peer review piece where they have to put it into the discussion forum online and get their classmates to respond to them. They're also able to present it live in the room to earn 8 extra credit points. And once they do that in the room, all of us talk it through with them and kind of help them work on it and ask questions about it and kind of make it better for them. So all of those things can happen before they ever even turn the thing in. And then I've created these different types of assignments that allow them to pursue something they're interested in. So one of them is business and art, where they can look at movies and they can bring sort of our analysis tools that we use in our business strategy class, and they can apply it to the thing that they're watching. One of the students did Monsters, Inc. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Monsters, Inc., but she talked all about the challenges of the electric company in Monsters, Inc. and how they were pursuing a particular strategy, and then we're able to find this other strategy. And it was awesome because we're all there watching, talking about a movie that we've all seen, and yet we're applying that kind of business thinking to something that's a fully, fake enterprise, obviously, with the monsters. But more than anything, I find that the personal achievement plan takes away the complaints related to the stress that they are under, right? Because I'm not giving them deadlines that are going to force them to complete work during midterm week when they have tests for everybody else. I'm not going to force them into a condition that would put that stress on them and make them want to go and take some of these shortcuts. Instead, they're able to follow their own schedule, recognize their own workload, and then build these things in for when they know they're going to have availability for it. And because we're doing that scaffolding thing where they can bring things in piecemeal, they're watching it get revised and get better and improve over time, and they take a lot more ownership of it. They can't simply buy something and turn it in right away because it's not going to fit the requirements of the assignment. So most of the students will set out a personal achievement plan with really aggressive deadlines. They'll say things like they're going to get into the discussion forum every single week. They're going to respond to their classmates. They're going to be doing all these things. They're super passionate and motivated. And then we get to like halfway through the semester and I start checking in with people and going like, how are things going with your personal achievement plan? They're like, yeah, I blew all my deadlines. I've not done anything. So at the end of the semester, we do a reflection assignment, which is the other half of the achievement plan. So they get the first 10 points at the beginning of the semester for building the plan, and then they get the other 10 points at the end of semester for doing a reflection assignment. And the reflection assignment is go back to your original plan and tell me whether or not you followed it, and if not, why not? And this is particularly relevant in the strategic management class where we're talking a lot about how companies build out a strategic plan and then how they measure their success against the plan. And so now the students are able to do that for themselves in this environment and recognize how valuable it is to have things they can actually measure and then reflect on the success that they've had. And some of them do a great job. They stick to their plan, they nail all their deadlines, and they love it. And others of them go, man, I thought this was a really great idea, and then I just did not hold myself accountable. And the only negative feedback I've ever gotten is that they tell me they wish that they had deadlines and they wish that I had been stricter on deadlines. I'm like, well, you guys could have been strict on deadlines. You just had to be strict on yourself about it. So giving them that personal ownership of the execution of the work has been extraordinarily valuable. So that's it, the personal achievement plan. And then the choice work capabilities, right? All these different assignments that they can choose from, a menu of them. And they're all worth the exact same amount. It's just a matter of making sure that they're doing one that demonstrates that they are learning what we need to learn in the class. So that's it.
Thank you for that, Dr. Whitener. And I'm sure the participants have the same reaction that Elisa and I had when we attended your October Best session and got to learn more about this, because it is extraordinary and amazing what you've done with your course and how you've designed it very intentionally to sort of deter students from engaging in that behavior, but also them definitely taking accountability and responsibility for their own learning and being able to design that personal achievement plan. And so now that sort of brings us to disincentivizing a focus on grades, which I think the personal achievement plan definitely does because of how it's weighted and things sort of equaling the same amount of points. So the quote that we have here, yet while these students think they're keeping their eyes on the ball, they are actually just staring at the scoreboard. And so if we're thinking of sports, it's very counterintuitive to focus on the scoreboard when there's an actual game going on in front of you. And so if we put that in the context of a classroom, our students are constantly checking Blackboard and they're keeping their eyes on the grade. That's their end goal and that's all they're focused on. However, they have all this information and material that they need to learn in front of them and they aren't focusing on that. So when they're not concentrating on the correct thing, then they lose sight of the entire process of learning and the entire purpose behind higher education and being able to further their knowledge about a certain major or whatever subject that they're taking. If students can redirect their focus from the scoreboard to the game of learning, an interesting thing happens. And so that focus on learning will create a direct relationship between the input and output. and they will be more invested in their learning. And so I think that connects back to the whole idea of developing intellectual autonomy is, again, creating that relationship between learning and success, because when learning and success are linked, ultimately the grades will come behind that, and they will accomplish sort of the academic performance that they are seeking to achieve.
So building a preventative community. This again gets to what are some of the solutions, and we're going to really expound on the fifth bullet about making cheating not worth the risk. So we have covered on the aspects of essentially making cheating unnecessary, because we're designing our classroom in a way that uses a lot of Dr. Whitener's strategies that help students develop some intellectual autonomy, that reinforces to them the importance of that and how much more rewarding your class will be through that lens. And so we kind of want to address motivating students not to cheat based on some of the costs that can also occur. So what we want to do is assess students' expectations and their goals. And this can be done on the first day. This can be done through them giving you perhaps a 3-minute video on Blackboard about themselves and what their expectations and concerns in your class are. Always offering transparency by letting them know what your expectations are, whether they're implicit or explicit. When students have 5 different instructors, there's no way that they're going to really know. And so making sure that you're building up their self-efficacy and letting them know that your expectations are high and what that means is critical. So that can be related to participation, all of these things, letting you know when to email you late, when you're going to be able to email back, the difficulty level of the assessments, that you're not going to, it's not going to be extraordinarily hard just because, you like to feel puffed up, which nobody in this group would ever do that, but that it's going to be directly related to what they need to know in order to progress to the next section of the class. How do we know that they have gained the understanding so that they can really build and be accomplished by the end of the course? Cultivating peer-to-peer relationships through activities such as the study groups, making sure that they have a connection, and that's a built-in accountability that is kind of sneak attack accountability, frankly. So they're meeting with their groups, they are setting expectations for each other, they're setting deadlines for each other, open discussions about how they're doing, about what their questions are, about what they're struggling with in the course material, and making sure that as instructors we're adapted to change by making those pedagogical adjustments in response to their connection. So if we know that a student or a group of students, because we've done maybe a low risk quiz, are tanking, then showing them we're going to go back and review this. So let's have you work out, a sample problem, and let's identify where the gaps in understanding might be. And then again, making cheating not worth the risk. So really looking at the cost benefit and explaining the cost. And you can do this without being like, I am so scary, I'm going to stone you on the horseshoe. So making sure that that calculation is also explicit. So letting students know that if they perceive their ability to cheat is high, that you're going to be kind of countering that by walking around, by using a seating chart on exam days. And one of the authors of this chapter says that when they're doing a test, they never sit just at the front of the room. They always walk around and they have their eyebrows up, they have a slight smile so that students know they're not being accused. They're just making sure that everything is going smoothly for the test. And if a student has an individual question, that's also a time for them to ask that individual question. So other things related to the cost that play major roles in disincentivizing cheating, making sure that they know the risk of getting caught is pretty high in your classroom because academic integrity is important to you, and the likely consequences of being caught, which are published in my syllabus. So letting them know, hey, the ability to cheat is going to be low. Here are some of the things that we're doing to make sure that everybody has a fair playing field. The risk is pretty high because it's important to me, and the consequences include blank. So making that explicit and obvious is part of the transparency that was in that third learning outcome. And I'm going to shut up because I think a lot of people probably have questions for Casey. And in case we have some questions from the group, I think that making sure that we're expressed about the cost benefit analysis and then using these more proactive strategies should help your class. So questions and comments, please.
This was actually really timely because I had a guest lecturer today and I was sitting in the back of the classroom and I could see some of my students working on an extra credit activity online. Now, the purpose of it was to talk about social determinants of health and actually have them visit a dollar store to look at diet. And they were supposed to physically be in the store doing it, but I see them Googling and looking through the stuff online. If
Oh,
that's the case, I'm just seeing the back of their heads. I don't know who it is. I'm tempted to take away extra credit from the entire class because I know some are abusing it, but I also know not everyone is. Do you have any recommendations?
Megan, one, I'm sorry that that happened. I would, again, with the transparency, let students know that that particular assignment is no longer eligible for extra credit because there's no fidelity in the way that the students that you witnessed were accomplishing it, and that it kind of hurts your feelings that you had a really important goal in this and students were subverting that. And it is a pain for you, but if there is something similar that you can do, that whatever they gain from not doing it the proper way can't benefit them. And I would say, if you haven't already, whatever standard you want to set, I would just say that no longer is eligible because students weren't acting with fidelity, and I want you to get something out of it. And I know that the students who are turning it in didn't get that intended outcome from this offer of extra credit. I'm so sorry.
No, well, thank you. That's what I was thinking about doing, but I also didn't want to be too harsh.
Right. And you're re-examining the expectation and setting it for them. And then students who wouldn't do that are also kind of going, and so that there might be a feeling in the class that's pretty palpable of students who are disappointed that happened.
Yeah, I have a question for Megan about that. I think kind of similar to Katie is, what if you could tell us what was the objective of that assignment? Like, was it to analyze dollar store? Did the was being physically present in the store integral to the objective, or could they have trying to be meeting like the spirit of the assignment by looking at an online shopping experience?
Yeah, I can see where that's coming from, and a little bit of both. The students had to do a case study where they addressed social determinants of health, and I would say 80% of them didn't even address that the patient was in a food desert and that he had financial restrictions and was having a hard time eating healthy, not because he didn't want to, but because of that. And so I had given them the option to, if they couldn't get to a dollar store or if they didn't have one, to go to another small convenience store in their area. And I actually have in there that they're supposed to take a selfie at the store with their group if they decide to do it in a group of 3 to prove that they were there. It was to put them in the patient's shoes so they truly understand what our patients are having to go through when you tell them, only eat fresh fruits and vegetables, only eat lean meats. And this is the store that he has to go to. Is that practical? So I needed to force them into an uncomfortable situation, but that does beg the point. I did not offer them an opportunity or I expected that they would let me know if they could not go to the store, but I did not verbally share that within there, that if they had problems or restrictions to open up to me.
I just want to say I agree with Sarah that if it's an extra credit assignment, Megan, I think you would assume that for extra credit, people are going to go the extra mile. So I want to support your decision on that being physically in the store, if that's an important part of it, to get extra credit. If it was a required assignment, I could see that limitation being, a challenge, but with it being extra credit, I support that. I'm with Sarah on that.
Awesome. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and officially wrap us up. But if our presenters want to stay around and continue to answer questions, you are welcome to. April added an evaluation into the chat. If y'all can give us some feedback, that would be fantastic. But thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you so much, Casey, Jesse, Elisa, for being here and for presenting such great ideas around this question that I know we get all the time. So thank y'all so much. And then I'm going to pass it back. So if y'all want to ask more questions, please feel free. But otherwise, thank you and have a great weekend.